inheritance of natural resources in our wildlife refuges, wilderness areas, and national parks. H.R. 4480 drastically alters.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. The gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'm pleased to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Tipton, an author of one of the provisions of the bill.
The gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank you, Chairman Hastings, for yielding my time as well. America has always had a competitive advantage as a nation. It's been the entrepreneurship, the hard work, the innovation of the American people. But we've also always had a different advantage as well, affordable energy in this country. We see that now in peril. 1979, Jimmy Carter challenged this nation to move to energy self-sufficiency. Decade after decade, it has not been addressed. This piece of legislation is to move America fully into the 21st century, to be able to secure for us and for our children this land of liberty, opportunity, and growth. It comes with American energy. You know, the ranking member from Massachusetts, I have good news for you. When you read the actual legislation that is put forward, it states in my portion of the bill, the Planning for American Energy Act of 2012, page 16, line 16, calling on the Secretary of Interior to develop a plan for American energy. What does it say? Creating the best estimate based upon commercial and scientific data of the expected increase in megawatts for electricity production from each of the following sources: wind, solar, biomass, hydropower, and geothermal energy produced on federal lands. The very thing you asked for is in the bill. We have an opportunity to be able to create an American energy future in this nation, to be able to secure for our children that birthright that many of us grew up believing was an American birthright, the right to be able to live that American dream, to be able to put Americans back to work. You know, the Planning for American Energy Act of 2012, my portion of this bill, speaks to that common sense, all of the above proposal that we all seek: wind, solar, geothermal, hydroelectric, using the minerals, the resources, the natural gas, the oil that we find on American soil. When we see what is happening right now in the Middle East, when we see at the gas pump our prices doubled from just 3 short years ago, when we talk to senior citizens on fixed incomes who are finding out when they turn on that light switch that their bill has increased, is it time, is it appropriate for us to seek an American energy solution? The time has come. The day has arrived. Rather than encouraging energy off of our shores,
the gentleman is recognized for 30 seconds.
Rather than encouraging energy development off of our shores, as the President has done with his $2 billion loan guarantee to Brazil to develop their energy sources, if we're going to make those kind of investments, if we're going to look to that type of future, would it not be better for us to develop American energy on American soil to put Americans back to work and create American energy certainty? That day has come. The time is now. This is a good piece of legislation for American security and American jobs. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Washington reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Yes, I yield myself 1 minute.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. I thank the gentleman from Colorado. Yes, what the Republicans are saying is, in their bill, that they want a study for 4 years of wind and solar. A study? Well, maybe they should study the fact that it's very sunny in Florida. It's very windy out in the Midwest. And matter of fact, so sunny and so windy that there have been 45,000 new megawatts of wind installed over the last 6 years in the United States, that there's going to be 4,000 new megawatts of solar installed in the United States just this year. So maybe the Republicans should study, no, I do not yield, maybe the Republicans should study the studies that are already out there, and maybe they could actually look over and ask the coal industry what they're thinking as they've dropped from 51% of all electrical generation down to 36% of all electrical generation in the last 5 years. Maybe they're looking at the wind industry. Maybe they're looking at the solar industry. Maybe you could call them, but you don't have to wait 4 years, because all you want to do is study it. What we want to do is give the incentives to the wind and solar industry to continue their revolution. I would like to yield 5 minutes, if I may, Mr. Chairman, to the gentleman from New Jersey, the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Holt.
The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I thank my friend from Massachusetts, and I thank him for laying out so clearly all the shortcomings of this legislation, this oil above all legislation. It really is nothing but a big giveaway to big oil. The only jobs it will create will be in the boardrooms and the executive offices of the big oil companies, because since 2005, even as ExxonMobil, Chevron, BP, and Shell have made more than $650 billion in profits, need I repeat that, $650 billion in profits, they eliminated more than 11,000 jobs, U.S. jobs, American jobs. And this is even while wind and solar were creating 50,000 jobs. Yes, there's a mismatch here. The bill before us, presented by the Republicans, says we'll study to see how much solar and wind energy might come from these lands in the future, instead of saying let's get these energy sources of the 21st century rolling in these lands. It's not a plan of what we might get. The Markey Amendment would have set standards for what we would get. Now, the Republicans have a long record of protecting tax breaks for big oil while cutting clean energy initiatives. That's what we see here. But what I wanted to talk about is the damage that would be done under this legislation. Health officials today here in Washington are warning people to avoid the heat and stay indoors. I don't think they had in mind that we stay indoors to pass legislation that chokes off public health protections, that modifies the Clean Air Act to make it ineffective. And yet that's what this bill does. By rejecting clean energy and pushing only for more fossil fuels to blanket the world with heat-trapping pollution, the Republican majority is essentially turning off the world's air conditioner and turning on the heater. You know, there's a reason that the term fossil fuels apply. The term applies. Actually, two reasons. One is these are derived from ancient plants that have decayed deep in the earth and produced petroleum. But there's another reason. Fossil means archaic. Fossil means out of date. Fossil does not mean 21st century. And yet, that's where this legislation is taking us, in the wrong direction. And in the wrong direction with regard to environmental protection. In the wake of the Deepwater Horizon disaster, we shouldn't be playing games with safety and the environment. The spill exposed a woefully inadequate environmental review process that was done prior to the oil and gas leasing. The environmental review done prior to the BP spill was so sloppy that response plans talked about protecting walruses. Obviously, they were just, in an unthinking way, using old Alaska pages. Tourism is the lifeblood of so many of our coastal communities, and as the economy is struggling to recover, we can't risk the kind of environmental damage that derails economic progress in these areas. We should understand the risk of drilling, and we should strengthen the protections, not weaken them. Furthermore, there will be damage done to the whole leasing process. And for my colleagues on the other side of the aisle who are so worried that putting some real standards, some expecting good performance from oil companies would somehow interfere with their production, let me point out some good news. Today, the Interior Department announced the results of an oil and gas lease sale in the Gulf of Mexico. Now, according to the Interior Department,
the gentleman's time has expired.
Is there remaining time?
I yield. Could the chair tell me how much time is remaining on either side?
The gentleman has 8.5 minutes.
I yield an additional minute to the gentleman from New Jersey.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank my friend. According to the Interior Department, today's leases that were bid on today, which has some lease standards applied that require increasing rental rates and shorter lease terms, the very things that the other side of the folks on the other side of the aisle here say would be killers, would stop the drilling. Even with these new conditions for offshore drilling, a record-setting lease sale bringing in $11.7 billion. And they're saying what works here offshore won't work on the lands that we're talking about in this legislation. No, I'll tell you what's a killer in this. A killer is the relaxing of the public health and environmental standards in the legislation. That's literally a killer. I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Massachusetts reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Chairman, I am very pleased to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Alaska, or 2 minutes to the gentleman from Alaska, a state that has tremendous resources.
The gentleman from Alaska is recognized for 2 minutes.
I support this legislation. It's long overdue. Title VI's legislation is a good step forward in PET 4 in Alaska. And it's with great amazement I listened to the two previous speakers. You know, wind power. You can take and cover every acre of the United States, including the parks and refuges, and put solar panels on them, and you only produce 20% of the consumption of energy we use today. Now think about that. No parks, no refuges, all solar panels. We're going to take care of the problem. By the way, it has to be transported to a battery made by rare earths from China. That's what this is all about. It's nonsense. The idea that wind's going to solve the problem and solar's going to solve the problem, that's nonsense. Because in reality, fossil fuels to this day is the only fuel that can move an object, ladies and gentlemen. It moves your car, it moves your truck, it moves your plane, it moves your train, and it moves your ship that brings all the product to and from the United States. You're not going to do it with a beanie on your hat. You're not going to do it with solar panels that have to cover every acre of the United States of America, because we're collecting the power of the sun down here at the bottom of the pyramid. We're not collecting from the source. You want to go far, you want to be really reaching into the future, collect it up there and beam it down to a point where we can create electricity. This is a good bill because, ladies and gentlemen, keep in mind, our economy, as Mr. Tipton said it right, in his bill, we do have action on wind and solar, although it will not work, and we know it won't work. We need fossil fuel now, and we have the time to produce another source of energy that doesn't come and does not need electrical batteries to run a car. We're going to plug a car in? Nonsense. It won't happen because you need to produce energy from some other source to create the electricity. And you're against nuclear power. You're against hydropower. And by the way, you'd like to take and grow our way into new power by using corn, a food for energy.
The gentleman's time has expired.
That's absolutely nonsense. Shame on you to say this is not a good bill. This is a good bill. It's not a nonsense bill.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Washington reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Again, could I ask how much is remaining on the majority side?
17. The gentleman from Massachusetts has 17½ minutes. I'm sorry, the gentleman from Washington has 17½ minutes.
I'm going to reserve at this
The gentleman from Massachusetts has 7½ minutes.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'm very pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from South Carolina, member of the Natural Resources Committee, Mr. Duncan.
The gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the chairman. You know, there can be no national security without energy security. Let that sink in. There can be no national security without energy security. And House Republicans support a truly all-of-the-above energy policy, not one put forth by the Obama administration and House Democrats, which basically is an all-of-the-above, except for X, Y, and Z policy which blows through Americans' hard-earned tax dollars, chasing phantom solutions to our energy needs with companies like Solyndra. All of the above means opening up federal lands for energy production and exploration. And it puts Americans to work. Americans simply need to look to one western state to see a microcosm of what America could be with an energy-driven economy. That state's North Dakota. When you get off the plane in North Dakota, they give you a job whether you need one or not. They're approaching a 0% unemployment rate. Zero. Energy-driven economy. The microcosm of what this nation could be if we would pursue an energy-driven economy. Energy from federal lands could be a reality. Energy from the Outer Continental Shelf could be a reality if we would embrace opening up American resources for production like the folks in North Dakota have done on state and private lands. This is good policy for America. Energy policy works, and with that I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Washington reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Yes, I want to continue to reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. The gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Chairman, I'm very pleased to yield 3 minutes to another member of the Natural Resources Committee, Mr. Johnson from Ohio.
The gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 3 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, today I rise in strong support of H.R. 4480, the Domestic Energy and Jobs Act. You know, this important legislation begins to put in place a true all-of-the-above energy plan, a type of plan that has been missing since this president came into office in 2009. This legislation will expand oil, gas, and renewable energy development on federal lands to help increase the supply of energy and lower energy prices for consumers. It will also give relief to drivers that are paying high prices at the pump every month from very costly EPA regulations that are scheduled to go into place. This legislation also contains a bill that I introduced, the BLM Live Internet Auctions Act. This section of the bill is supported by my friends on the opposite side of the aisle here and even the administration. The BLM Live Internet Auctions Act will bring the BLM lease auction program into the 21st century by allowing BLM to conduct online leases just like the private sector has been doing for over 10 years. You know, we hear a lot about an all-of-the-above energy policy. The President even talked about an all-of-the-above energy policy in the State of the Union. I'm convinced that what the President means by an all-of-the-above energy policy is anything all and above the ground, because it seems like he doesn't want us going after our own natural resources. You know, if we had an energy policy that said, look, we're going to draw a line in the sand, and over the next 10 years we're going to become energy independent and secure in America. We're going to go after the trillions of barrels of oil that we already own. We're going to harvest the vast volumes of natural gas and oil that we own. We're going to continue to mine and harvest coal and use it environmentally soundly. We're even going to expand our nuclear footprint because it's the safest, most reliable form of energy on the planet. And yeah, we'll even look at wind and solar and find out where those renewable energy sources fit into an overall scheme. But we're not going to sit on the sidelines any longer and be beholden to foreign countries for our energy. If we had that kind of vision backed with regulatory reform that said to the regulatory agencies like the EPA and the Department of the Interior, Starting today, you become partners in progress with America's industries and businesses. If you've got a national security, a public health, or public safety reason for saying no, then say no. But don't let no be the final answer. I think the American people have an expectation that their elected officials and the bureaucracies that are sent here to manage the American system are partners in progress, not barriers to progress. So I urge my colleagues to support H.R. 4480, the Domestic Energy and Jobs Act. I certainly do, and I urge them to as well, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Washington reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Yes, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Ellison.
The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to thank you, Mr. Markey, and Mr. Hastings as well for the time. You know, my friends on the other side of the aisle keep on using this mantra, all the above, all the above. I think they should really name it oil above all. Oil above all would be a better name because it's very clear that this bill is really just a wish list and a checkoff for the big oil industry. It weakens public health protections. It forces arbitrary giveaways on public land. It puts energy drilling ahead of all uses of federal land. This is not a long-term strategy solution. It is an oil above all strategy. The oil, gas, and coal industry are already getting billions in corporate welfare while they're making record profits. How much of the American taxpayers' money do they need? They will receive at least $110 billion in subsidies over the next 10 years. These subsidies have been won by decades of lobbying. And in 2011, the oil, gas, and coal industry spent $167 million lobbying. But in comparison to the return on their investment, $167 million is small because they got subsidies to $110 billion. So it's lucrative for them to do so. They don't even need our help, Mr. Speaker. In 2011, just last year, the big five oil companies made $137 billion in profits. That's good by any measure. Why in the world would an industry that makes $137 billion in profits need the help of the American people with these tax breaks that the Republican majority won't even agree to get rid of? Thank you.
The gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. The gentleman from Washington.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm very pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Georgia, Dr. Gingrey, a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I thank the chairman for yielding. The previous speaker, the gentleman from Minnesota, it sounds like his policy on his side of the aisle is no oil no matter what. This is a very good bill that if it becomes law, H.R. 4480, the Domestic Energy and Jobs Act, will put people back to work. It will be a great, giant step toward creating energy independence for this country. And yes, indeed, my colleagues, it will bring down the price of gasoline at the pump, which has actually doubled in 3.5 years under President Obama's watch. You know, as a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee, let me focus on one specific title of this legislation, the Strategic Energy Production Act. Now, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve that we have in this country is about 700 million barrels of oil. And, Mr. Chairman, that reserve is there for a situation of a domestic crisis, not a political crisis. 700 million barrels of oil, we use 20 million barrels of oil a day in this country. And if you assume that 60% of it was domestically produced and we had to import 8 million barrels of oil a day, then think about how many days if we
truly had a crisis, and these countries like OPEC cut us off completely from what we import, then that reserve would last about 90 days, a 3-month period of time. And yet President Obama wants to take that reserve and use it for political purposes. This title of the bill, Mr. Chairman, just simply says that for every ounce of oil that he takes out of the strategic reserve, we would increase that same amount on federal lands. And of course, he has cut that production.
The gentleman's time has expired.
An additional 30 seconds.
I yield the gentleman an additional 30 seconds.
The gentleman is recognized for 30 seconds.
And I thank the gentleman because this is an important point, my colleagues, that what this president has done has simply cut the production on federal lands, by 11% on his watch. Let's pass this bill so that we do create jobs, we put people back to work, we become independent in this country and not dependent on nations that hate us. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Let's put that down. Washington reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts.
I would like to continue to reserve at this time.
The gentleman from Massachusetts reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Chairman, I'm very pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Tennessee, Dr. Rowe.
The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise today in support of H.R. 4480. The average American family buys 1,100 gallons of gasoline per year. If the price of gas fell just $1 from the current national average of $3.49, families would save $1,100 a year. For far too long, this administration has prioritized politics over the needs of the American people, and today in this body, we have an opportunity to work together and do what's right for the future of this country. The Domestic Energy and Jobs Act will help ease the pain at the pump, create jobs, and push this country towards energy independence. This common-sense legislation would put several costly and potential burdensome EPA regulations on hold while an analysis of the potential costs and consequences of these rules is done. To me, it's unthinkable that we wouldn't ask agencies to consider the impact of a regulation on jobs and the economy, particularly at a time of such economic uncertainty. To boost our energy production, the Domestic Energy and Jobs Act will require the Secretary of the Interior to act on oil and natural gas lease applications and will cut red tape on opening up new reserves in Alaska. This legislation would also restrict the Strategic Petroleum Reserve from being tapped unless the administration develops a plan to allow more leases to explore for additional sources of oil. Let me put this in perspective right here. As a young Army officer in Korea in 1973 and 74, there was an oil embargo, if you don't remember. The OPEC cut off oil production and sending it to the U.S. We only got heat 3 hours a day. We had to keep the heat for our tanks and our aircraft to protect this nation. So it is one of strategic importance, and energy is a very important source of that. To obtain energy independence, it's not only a key component to domestic recovery, it's also an issue of national security, as I just mentioned. Becoming energy independent is far too important for the future of this country to continue to put politics above people. I encourage my colleagues to join in supporting the Domestic Energy and Jobs Act, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Washington reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Now, may I ask again, Mr. Chairman, that we review where the majority and minority are in time remaining in debate?
The gentleman from Massachusetts has 5½ minutes. The gentleman from Washington has 8½ minutes.
I will yield myself 1 minute at this time.
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. I'd just like to review once again the Republican all of the above plan. 1, light sweet crude oil. 2, sour high sulfur oil. 3, heavy oil. 4, tar sands oil. 5, oil shale. And, oh, just to mix it up, a little natural gas. What they forgot was, of course, wind and solar and geothermal and biomass, and they won't even allow us to have an amendment out here on the floor in order to have a debate over it. But that oil above all agenda you have, it's very comprehensive, and I give you a lot of credit for figuring out every single way that we can help all the oil companies in the United States at the expense of all the renewable energy industries. I continue to reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Washington.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Connolly.
The gentleman from Mississippi is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank the chairman for yielding. I rise in support of the Domestic Energy and Jobs Act. You know, America's been blessed with an abundance of natural resources under our feet, off our shores. We have the largest coal reserves in the world. New technologies are making it possible to unlock vast new reserves of oil and natural gas. We need to be doing everything possible to safely and responsibly develop those natural resources, because doing so will create good, high-paying jobs. And it'll improve national security by reducing dependence on energy from unstable regions of the world. Higher gas prices are a cruel tax. They're a cruel tax on hard-working men and women that are trying to find a way to get back and forth to work. Higher gas prices are a cruel tax on seniors living on fixed income. And unfortunately, this administration is full of people that are pushing a radical environmental agenda that's hostile to energy development. They believe the solution is to force the price of traditional energy supplies to skyrocket so that alternative green energy becomes artificially competitive. Alternative energy should be a part of the mix, but the reality is that fossil fuels will be the main source of our energy for at least the next 2 generations, and it's fantasy to suggest otherwise. Now, we do support an all-of-the-above strategy, but that all-of-the-above strategy also includes an all-of-the-below strategy. We support developing those resources that are below our feet and off our shores. That's why I'm proud to support the Domestic Energy and Jobs Act. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Washington reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Yes, I yield myself at this time 2 minutes.
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for 2 minutes.
You know, I hate giving all the bad news to the Republicans, but I'll give you some more bad news. You hate to hear it, but I'll give it to you anyway. In 2011, in terms of new electrical generation in the United States, 33% came from natural gas, 29% from wind, 20% from coal, and 8% from solar. Got that again? Wind and solar were about 37% of all new electrical generating capacity in the United States in the year 2011. But you guys want to study it. You know, you want to have more information about this technology. And by the way, in that study, you should also throw a few other things. A single device from which you can talk to your family, send emails, and watch videos. That's a concept some people have. You might want to study that as well. Oh, no, we already have that. Sending a man to the moon and returning them safely to the Earth, I guess that's something else we already did. How about studying the possibility of mapping the entire human genome so we can have an idea of what that material that humanity is made out of to kind of make breakthrough? Oh, you know, I think we've already done that. And there may be many other things that we can throw into that solar and wind study that we also don't need to have studied, that you can also throw in there as part of your technological and scientific phobia that refuses to have you admit that things are already happening. And by the way, something else you're refusing to admit that happened? During Bush's term as president, the production of oil went down, 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 down. 2001, 2008. You know what happened once Obama took over? Up, 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 up. So much oil drilling that it's all the rigs in the world combined not matching what Obama has done in terms of total oil rigs out there. And we are now at an 18-year high in oil. But I know maybe you should study this. This is hard for you to understand. I've heard all the members out here saying that there's a jihad against oil that is being waged by the Obama administration. It just doesn't match any of the evidence. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. The gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Chairman, I do advise my very good friend from Massachusetts that I am prepared to close if he is prepared to close.
Great. Could you tell me again how much time is remaining, Mr. Chairman?
The gentleman from Massachusetts has 2.5 minutes.
Then I will yield myself the balance of my time.
The gentleman is recognized for 2.5 minutes.
Let me just say that I know it's not anything that has been observed by the Republicans, but the price of gasoline has dropped for the last 11 weeks in a row ever since the President threatened to use the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, because it was never about supply and demand. It was always about fear and greed. It was what Wall Street was doing in manipulating the price of oil and the commodities futures marketplace. It was about the fear that people had about a war in Iran breaking out. But what's the response from the Republicans? Well, they have a brilliant amendment inside of their bill. What they say here is that if, God forbid, the Ayatollah ever attacked the United States, a Middle Eastern war ever broke out, and the President deployed the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, 10 million barrels worth of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, you know what their bill says? That we, that is the federal government, if the Republican bill passes today, would then have to sell to ExxonMobil and the other big oil companies 200 million acres of federal lands for ExxonMobil and the other big oil companies to drill on. Understand that? That the Ayatollah attacks us. There's a war in the Middle East. And who do we have to pay the ransom to? To the big oil companies of the United States if we deploy the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Now, how nonsensical is that? That is an absolutely crazy idea, that the oil companies become the beneficiaries of a Middle Eastern conflict. They get the public lands of the United States, 200 million acres, that we have to sell them simultaneously. It's almost a trigger that occurs inside of their legislation. That's how mashugana this all is. This is just, it's absolutely a crazy set of concepts where we can't have an amendment on wind and solar, geothermal, biomass, plug-in hybrids, all new technologies and efficiency that back out the need for all this oil to ever come in the first place. And as a penalty, the country to use the Strategic Petroleum Reserve as a weapon of our national security against OPEC, that if the President uses it, we have to sell 200 million acres of American land to the oil companies so they can even drill for bargain basement prices here in the country. This bill is absolutely the wrong recipe for our country as we head into the 21st century. I urge a no vote.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Washington.
And Mr. Chairman, how much time do I have?
The gentleman from Washington has 7 minutes.
I will yield myself the balance of the time.
The gentleman from Washington is recognized for 7 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, it is hard to know where to start as I close the debate on this portion of the bill, because there's been so much information out there and so much information that frankly is, I won't say it's untrue, but it's not exactly accurate. Let me start with the idea that the price of gasoline has dropped with this administration. In January of 2009, the average price of gasoline in this country was $1.82 a gallon. Now, what is magic about January 2009? Well, that was the month that the President was inaugurated, and the price of gasoline was $1.82 a gallon. Today, the average price of gasoline is $3.48. Now, if your math is such that the price of gasoline drops when it starts at $1.82 and ends at $3.48, you've got fuzzy math. But that's what we keep hearing. Furthermore, we have heard, I don't know how many members of my good friends the other side spoke, but I dare say every one of them said that this is a giveaway to oil and gas. If they didn't say it, they implied it, trying to get that message across. Now, I wondered when I heard the debate here about there's no reference to renewables if they read the bill. I am now convinced they did not read the bill, Mr. Chairman, and let me tell you why. Because when we talk about renewables, we're talking about federal lands. And we say that the Secretary, and I'm reading from page 15, Title 3, Section 44, Paragraph 3. It says, and I quote, "The Secretary shall determine a domestic strategic production objective for the development of energy resources from federal onshore lands." Now, that's a directive. So we said, well, on page 16, we make reference to renewable energy. And they said, well, it's just a study. What do you mean it's just a study? Well, if you read, Mr. Chairman, we are asking for a study for the estimates of what? On subsection A, it's oil and natural gas. What? We are asking for a study of oil and natural gas on federal lands. Then you go to B. Now it's for C, I should say here, yes. It talks about the critical minerals. Then it goes on to renewables. In other words, the point I'm making, Mr. Chairman, and this is very important, if this is a giveaway to oil and gas companies and not helping renewables, then why is the precise same language for the production of energy, for the type of production of energy on federal lands? You can't have it both ways. So I think, Mr. Chairman, that this is a very good bill because we are focusing on where? The greatest resources we have in this country on federal lands. That's where the greatest potential resources are. This bill is aimed at those resources. That's why this bill is so important. Let's set production goals on all energy development, and that means all of the above. That means above ground. That means underground, as my friend from Mississippi said. That's what we are attempting to do. But to suggest that this is a giveaway, when precisely the same language applies to all energy production, frankly, is inaccurate. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I urge my colleagues to support this piece of legislation. With that, I'll yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. All time for general debate has expired. Pursuant to the rule, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. In lieu of the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on Energy and Commerce printed in the bill, it shall be in order to consider as an original bill for the purpose of amendment under the 5-minute rule, an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 112-24. That amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be considered as read. No amendment to that amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be in order except those printed in House Report 112-540. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report by a member designated in the report, shall be considered read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to an amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 1, printed in House Report 112-540. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 1, printed in House Report Number 112-540, offered by Mr. Hastings of Washington.
Pursuant to House Resolution 691, the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Hastings, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Chairman, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, the National Petroleum Reserve Alaska, or NPR-A, was specifically designated as a petroleum reserve back in 1923. It's as a place that we could develop our resources for energy and national security. Title VI of this bill will ensure that production can occur on NPR-A by requiring at least one annual lease sale, streamline the permitting process to ensure lease sales to energy production, and ensure a right-of-way for a plan to allow for the transportation of the product out of NPR-A. In addition to making technical corrections, this amendment aims to accomplish two vital goals that are imperative for facilitating development at NPR-A. First, it would require, at the request of the state of Alaska, up to 2 additional right-of-ways planned in and out of NPR-A. This would prepare for future development by providing approved rights-of-way in and out of this area. Secondly, it would repeal the designation of the Colville River as an aquatic resource of national importance. This designation was blatantly used by the anti-energy EPA as nothing more than a tool to stop energy development on this area. While the President touts his energy record and speaks of his support for leasing and energy development in the NPR-A, he fails to mention that due to red tape from his administration, Alaskans have waited years and years for approval to build a simple bridge across the Colville River to begin production on NPR-A. What you do here is that the EPA has paid no attention to the Colville River until after, I want to say that again, Mr. Chairman, after ConocoPhillips filed its application for a bridge. And it was shortly after that application that EPA declared it was an aquatic resource of national importance. And it was that action that stopped the development and production for nearly a decade before approval of this simple bridge and pipeline. What the Obama administration says and what the administration does to promote energy development in Alaska are entirely 2 different things. So those 2 things that I mentioned in this amendment would give Alaskans the assurance that they need to create jobs and encourage development of the NPR-A. And with that, I reserve my time.
The gentleman reserves his time.
Mr. Chairman, I rise to claim time in opposition to this amendment.
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, when managers' amendments making technical changes to legislation are presented, such amendments are accepted, and we move on to amendments making substantive changes to the bill. In this instance, however, among the technical changes made by this manager's amendment is a controversial provision, flatly overturning an EPA ruling in Alaska. This change should not be made at all, but it certainly should not be made as part of a manager's amendment. As part of the review process for beginning energy production in the National Petroleum Reserve in Alaska, the EPA designated the Colville River, the largest Arctic river in Alaska, as an aquatic resource of national importance. To be clear, this designation did not stop the proposed project. ConocoPhillips has already received approval to build a gravel road, including a bridge over the Colville to access their oil field. The national importance designation simply required a heightened level of review before the project moved forward. For Congress to overturn this EPA finding through a provision buried in what is supposed to be a technical manager's amendment is not appropriate. Mr. Chairman, I doubt a single member of this House has an informed opinion regarding whether the Colville River is an aquatic resource of national importance, but I will tell you who does have an informed position on that question, and that is the scientists in Alaska working for the Environmental Protection Agency. This provision is ill-informed. It's an attack upon an agency decision, and for the purposes of this debate, it has no place in a manager's amendment. It should be a standalone amendment that we're debating. But because of the inappropriateness of it being inside of the manager's amendment, I would have to oppose this provision, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Massachusetts reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Chairman, I advise my friend I have no more requests for time, and I'm prepared to close if the gentleman is prepared to close.
We are both prepared to close, and I will, again, I will just restate, and I yield myself the balance of my time, and that is just to say
the gentleman is recognized.
I don't have a problem in debating this issue, but I just think that it should be done in an appropriate way. It is an important issue. It overturns an EPA decision of some significance, and I urge a no vote, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Chairman, just briefly, I'll yield myself the balance of the time.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, just briefly, there are technical amendments in here which I acknowledge and the gentleman did acknowledge, but there are 2 substantive changes, and I acknowledge both of those. Now, I just want to repeat He talked about the issue of that the Colville River was a aquatic resource of national importance. And so he was basing that on the reason why we should oppose or why we should not adopt this amendment. Well, I just want to point out again, and I made this observation in my remarks, the Colville River was not designated this until after, I want to say this again, very slowly, sometimes you don't hear things in this echo chamber, after Conoco wanted to develop the NPR-A. When they developed the NPR-A, it had to have access across the Colville River. But, EPA said, wait a minute, all of a sudden, this might be a good time to make that change. That's pure politics, Mr. Chairman, and I will say this. I was up in Alaska last year. I stood right at the spot where they wanted to build a bridge across the Colville River. Now, the Colville River there is not very large, and to suggest that it falls into that category and we should not adopt this amendment flies right in the face of common sense. So with that, I urge my colleagues to adopt this amendment, and I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Washington. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
On that, I ask for a recorded vote, Mr. Chairman.
The amendment is not agreed to. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Washington will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 2, printed in House Report 112-540. For what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 2, printed in House Report Number 112-540, offered by Mr. Polis of Colorado.
Pursuant to House Resolution 691, the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Polis, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Colorado.
I yield myself 2 minutes.
The gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you. My amendment would better protect the health of children by providing a 1,000-foot buffer between schools and oil or gas drilling using the technique commonly known as fracking. Now, hydraulic fracturing is truly a national issue, and natural gas is an important part of our national energy policy. According to the Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission, oil and gas production occurs in 33 states. Fracking occurs on more than 90% of oil and gas wells in the U.S. Advances in unconventional oil and gas extraction have led to an increase in fracking near where people live, work, and play in my district, across Colorado, and across the United States. That means increased exposure to toxic chemicals for kids in school and the air that researchers have found near wells, as well as noise and the nuisance of heavy truck traffic. A recent report by the Colorado School of Public Health indicated that residents living less than half a mile from wells are at greater risk of acute and chronic health problems than those that live more than half a mile from drilling sites, including exposure to air pollutants like benzene, a known carcinogen, at a level 5 times higher than the federal hazard standard. Given this risk and the need for more information, we should obviously err on the side of caution, particularly when it comes to children. We need additional studies to better understand the health impacts, but given what we know, frankly, it's time to act. Now, we already set some basic standards when we know pollutants may put children at risk. As an example, in my district in Colorado, commercial diesel vehicles are prohibited from idling for more than 5 minutes within 1,000 feet of a school. In New York, fracking operations may be placed 100 feet from a home and 150 feet from a public building. Now, a review of active and prospective wells in 4 northern Colorado counties found 26 schools that have drilling wells operational emitting toxic gases within 1,000 feet of schools. In Erie, Colorado, I met with homeowners and parents who are increasingly concerned about the impacts of fracking on their health and their children's health. We should be listening to their voices and not just the demands of energy companies. We need to find a reasonable compromise to address the concerns of families in Erie and across America. I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Hinchey.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for 2 minutes.
I rise in strong support of the gentleman's amendment, which would prohibit hydraulic fracturing on public lands from taking place within 1,000 feet of our schools.
This major industrial activity has significant public health risks and has no business being near our kids. Hydraulically fractured wells emit huge quantities of smog-forming chemicals, volatile organic compounds, hazardous air pollutants like benzene, as well as methane. These pollutants cause serious health problems. This past March, the Colorado School of Public Health released a report based on 3 years of monitoring that found higher cancer, respiratory and neurological health risks among people living closest to drilling sites. The analysis found volatile organic chemicals to be 5 times the level at which the emissions are considered potentially harmful to public health, according to EPA's Hazard Index. The Medical Society of New York has recently urged caution with expanded drilling because of concerns about health impacts, and data collected by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration has shown increased ground-level ozone and other pollution as a result of fracking. But the risks go beyond just air quality. In April 2010, there was major blowout in Pennsylvania at a hydraulic fracturing well site. Gas and tainted brine sprewed 75 feet in the air for 16 hours. These kinds of blowouts happen far too often. Even the best regulated activities have accidents, but fracking, as we all know, is far from the best regulated activities. We need to keep it away from our kids. It shouldn't be done near our schools, and I urge support for the gentleman's amendment.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Colorado.
I yield myself the remainder of the time.
The gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Thank you. I would ask my colleagues to ask themselves, would they want their kids to be 300 feet, 500 feet every day from a fracking site? 300 feet is the size of one football field. Fracking is scientifically documented at producing air pollution. We know the level of air pollution that is promoted, and it is measured. Advances in technology make reasonable accommodations possible. Directional drilling means we can actually locate wells miles from schools and still extract the oil and natural gas resources we need and make sure that our children remain healthy. I'm hopeful that my colleagues on both sides of the aisle support this common sense amendment that will protect public health, ensure the safe development of natural gas, and promote domestic energy production. I urge a yes vote on this amendment. I urge my colleagues to join me in keeping our children safe. And I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
I rise in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, this amendment would really restrict the ability to produce energy on federal lands, and I think, quite frankly, it is purely a political amendment. Rather than allow existing environmental protections and reviews to ensure that we have safe drilling operations, this amendment seeks to use an arbitrary standard that frankly is more a scare tactic than good science. And it would actually harm school districts, principally those in the Intermountain West, that take advantage of their large landholder status to lease their lands for energy development. In addition, it would infringe upon the ability of Native American tribes to manage their lands and their resources. It's bad policy, particularly for the consequences of tribal lands that are trying to develop their energy resources. This would restrict their ability to do that. Now, we've heard the other side talk about why we need to do this, and the implication is that we need to do this to protect drinking water at our children's schools that may become contaminated from hydraulic fracturing. Now, Mr. Chairman, I want to say this very emphatically. This information of contamination is based on absolutely no science or factual evidence. As a matter of fact, to put an exclamation point on that, earlier this week, the gentleman who was offering this amendment, his governor, Governor Hickenlooper of Colorado, who I might add is a Democrat, was quoted as saying, and I'll say the whole quote here, and I'll say it as slowly as I can so everybody can understand what Governor Hickenlooper said. I quote, There have been tens and thousands of wells in Colorado, and we can't find anywhere in Colorado a single example of the process of fracking that has polluted groundwater, end quote. Now, I didn't say this. I'm quoting the governor of the gentleman who offered the amendment, his state. So, Mr. Chairman, I just have to say, I believe this is a politically motivated amendment, and it frankly does not even deserve debate on that. So I urge rejection of this amendment. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Colorado. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. The chair understands that amendment number 3 will not be offered. It is now in order to consider amendment number 4, printed in House Report 112-540. For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 4, printed in House Report number 112-540, offered by Mr. Quigley of Illinois.
Pursuant to House Resolution 600.